The sky hung heavy with clouds, thick and gray, pressing down on the earth like the weight Daniel Carter carried in his chest. The cemetery gates loomed ahead, iron bars rusting at the edges, their intricate design twisted into vines that had long since lost their bloom. He hesitated, gripping the cold metal, inhaling deeply as if he could steady himself with the air alone. It had been 15 years since he had last seen his father, and nearly 2 since the man had died. Not once had he visited, not for the funeral, not for closure. His father had been an absence in his life long before he became a permanent one. Yet here he was, standing at the threshold of the dead, unsure of what he expected to find. Daniel forced himself forward, gravel crunching under his boots as he walked the rows of headstones. Some were polished and well-kept, adorned with flowers and trinkets of love. Others had been left to time, their names fading beneath moss and neglect. He carried a small slip of paper in his pocket, scrawled with the section and plot number. He didn't need it. He had memorized it the moment he finally decided to come. Section C, Row 12, Plot 47. His breath quickened as he approached. The grave was simple, a modest slab of granite, no elaborate carvings, no grand epitaphs. Just a name. A name that made his blood run cold. Michael Harrison. 1958 to 2022. Beloved father and friend. Daniel stared at the inscription, his mind struggling to reconcile what his eyes were seeing. He had come to visit Richard Carter, the man who had raised him, left him, disappointed him at every turn. But the name carved into the stone was someone else entirely. He blinked, taking a step back as if distance could make sense of the impossibility. He checked the slip of paper again, his own handwriting stark against the page. Section C, Row 12. Plot 47. This was the grave. This was his father. But that wasn't his name. His stomach twisted as a wave of unease slithered up his spine. Was this a mistake? A clerical error? Or was there something more to his father's past that he had never known? Daniel glanced around as if searching for an answer among the tombstones. No one else was nearby, just the whisper of the wind through the barren trees. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. He had spent years resenting the man who had abandoned him. He had imagined this moment so many times, standing here, speaking the words he had rehearsed in his mind. But now, with a stranger's name before him, all those imagined conversations vanished like mist. A gust of wind carried the scent of damp earth, and he swallowed hard. He wasn't ready to leave. Not without answers. Digging into his coat pocket, he pulled out his phone and dialed the only person who might know the truth. His mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. "Daniel?" He exhaled sharply. "Mom. I'm at Dad's grave." A pause. "You finally went?" "Yeah." He hesitated, staring at the name once more. "But there's a problem." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling beneath his skin. "His name. The headstone says Michael Harrison." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then, finally, her voice came, barely above a whisper. "Daniel, you need to leave." His pulse spiked. "What? Why?" "Just go," she pleaded. "Don't ask questions. Just walk away." But he couldn't. Not now. Not when the father he thought he knew was already a ghost of a lie. And Daniel Carter had never been one to walk away from the truth. Daniel's hands shook as he ended the call. His mother's words echoed in his mind, each syllable dripping with a fear she hadn't even tried to hide. "You need to leave," but how could he? Walking away now would mean accepting the impossible, that his father had lived and died under a name Daniel had never known. That the man who had shaped so much of his life was, in some way, a stranger. He crouched beside the grave, running his fingers along the engraved letters. The cold stones sent a shiver up his arm. There was no mistake. This wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. His father had chosen to be buried under the name Michael Harrison. He pulled out his phone again, this time searching online for obituaries. If his father had lived under an alias, there had to be some record of it. Within seconds, the screen lit up with a local news article from 2 years prior. Michael Harrison, 64, passed away peacefully in his home on September 14, 2022. He is survived by his loving family and close friends. A private burial was held at Rosewood Cemetery. No mention of Daniel. No mention of the life Richard Carter had led before. Just Michael Harrison, a man with a past Daniel didn't recognize. His breath came in short, shallow bursts as the implications unraveled in his mind. Who had his father really been? And what had he been hiding from? With a newfound sense of urgency, Daniel climbed back into his car, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled determination. There was only one place to go now, the person who had just tried to scare him away. His mother. The drive to her house felt longer than usual. Each passing mile was thick with memories, flashing like old film reels across his consciousness. His father teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway. The fights that left his mother in tears. The empty seat at every milestone in Daniel's life. When he finally pulled up to the small, single-story home, he barely had time to knock before the door swung open. His mother stood in the entryway, her face pale, her expression drawn tight with apprehension. "You didn't leave," she said softly. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "No," he answered. "And I'm not going to until you tell me the truth." She hesitated, glancing at the floor. Then, with a deep breath, she gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit down, Daniel." He obeyed, heart hammering as she settled into the chair across from him. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "You were never supposed to find out," she murmured. "Find out what?" His voice was sharper than he intended, but he couldn't hold back the frustration clawing at his insides. "Who was Michael Harrison?" She closed her eyes, as if steeling herself for a confession long buried. When she opened them again, they shimmered with unshed tears. "Your father wasn't the man you thought he was." Daniel stared at his mother, his pulse hammering in his ears. The weight of her words settled over him like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you trying to tell me?" His mother exhaled shakily, wringing her hands together as if she could press the truth deeper into her skin. "Your father, Michael Harrison, Richard Carter, they were the same man. But the life he had before you, before us, was not one he could escape." Daniel's stomach clenched. "Escape from what?" She hesitated. "From who?" The air between them crackled with tension, but before she could continue, her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. She flinched, glancing at the screen with widened eyes before hastily silencing the call. Daniel leaned forward. "Who was that?" "No one," she answered too quickly. "It's nothing." But Daniel wasn't convinced. Without breaking eye contact, he reached for the phone and flipped it over. The number was unknown. No name. Just a string of digits that meant nothing to him but clearly meant something to her. "Who keeps calling you?" he pressed. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the phone from his grasp. "Daniel, please. There are things I never wanted you to know. But I need to know them." His voice was firm now. "If Dad was living under a different name, if he was hiding something, I deserve to know why." A heavy silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she swallowed hard and said, "Your father wasn't just running from his past, he was running from someone in it." Daniel sat back, his mind racing. Before he could respond, his own phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number flashing across the screen. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A pause. Then a deep, unfamiliar voice crackled through the speaker. "You should have left it alone." The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, his heart hammering in his chest. His mother's face had gone pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Mom," he whispered, dread pooling in his stomach. "Who the hell was that?" Her lips trembled as she whispered, "It's already too late." Daniel sat frozen, his mother's whispered words sinking deep into his bones. It's already too late. Too late for what? Too late to stop? Too late to turn back? His mind spun with questions, but fear had begun to settle like a lead weight in his chest. His mother wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, as though bracing herself against the storm she had just unleashed. Daniel, she finally said, her voice fragile. There are things buried in the past that should never be dug up. Then why did Dad hide them? He shot back, standing abruptly. Why did he have another name? Why is someone calling me, threatening me? Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small brass key. She hesitated before sliding it across the table toward him. Your father kept a box, she murmured. In the attic. Daniel eyed the key, his pulse quickening. What's in it? She exhaled shakily. The truth. The attic was suffocating, filled with the scent of dust and forgotten time. Daniel climbed the narrow staircase, the single hanging bulb casting eerie shadows over the cluttered space. He had spent so many childhood summers avoiding this place, spooked by its ghostly silence. Now, it felt like stepping into a past that wasn't his own. He found the box easily enough, an old wooden chest, pushed against the far wall beneath a tattered quilt. He ran a hand over the surface, feeling the rough grain of the wood before slipping the key into the lock. With a reluctant click, it gave way. Inside, the first thing he saw were documents. Stacks of them. Passports, IDs, social security cards, each bearing his father's face, but none with the name Richard Carter. Michael Harrison. David Lorne. Peter Caldwell. Name after name, life after life. His breath hitched as he pulled out an aged envelope at the bottom of the chest, his name scrawled across it in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Hands trembling, he tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I've failed to keep the past from finding you. I never wanted you involved in this. I hoped you'd never know. But the truth is, I wasn't the man you thought I was. And now, you need to decide how much of this you're willing to uncover, because once you start, there's no stopping. Be careful, son. Some names should remain buried, Dad. Daniel's hands clenched around the paper as his pulse pounded in his ears. He had spent years resenting his father for leaving. Now, he wasn't sure if his father had ever truly left at all. Somewhere in the distance, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Daniel's fingers hovered over his phone as the unknown number flashed on the screen. His pulse pounded in his ears. Every instinct told him to ignore it, but his father's letter burned in his grip. He swiped to answer. Hello? A moment of silence, then a voice, low and deliberate. You shouldn't have opened the box. Daniel's breath hitched. Who is this? You need to stop looking. The call ended. Daniel stared at the phone, dread pooling in his stomach. He turned back to the chest, rifling through its contents. There had to be more, something that explained why his father had lived under different names. His fingers brushed against an old business card tucked between the papers. Edward Raines, private investigator. Without hesitation, he dialed the number. The coffee shop smelled of burned espresso and desperation. Edward Raines was already waiting in a corner booth, his sharp eyes tracking Daniel's approach. He was older than Daniel expected, his suit rumpled, his beard speckled with gray. You look just like him, Raines said as Daniel slid into the seat. Daniel tensed. You knew my father? Raines exhaled. I knew one of him. Daniel placed the letter on the table. He's dead. And I need to know why he was hiding. Raines studied him for a long moment before pulling out a faded photograph from his coat pocket. It showed his father, young, smiling, arm around a woman Daniel didn't recognize. That's your father, Raines said. And the woman next to him? That's the reason he had to disappear. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the photo. Who is she? Raines hesitated. Your father wasn't just running from a past mistake. He was running from people who don't let go. And if they know you're looking, they won't let you go either. Daniel swallowed hard. Then tell me the truth before it's too late. Rains leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Your father wasn't just hiding a name, Daniel. He was hiding a crime. Daniel's grip tightened around the photograph, his fingers trembling as he studied the woman's face. She looked familiar in a way he couldn't explain, her smile warm, yet shadowed by something he couldn't quite place. What crime? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rains exhaled, rubbing his temple as if debating how much to say. Your father, Michael Richard, whatever name he was using, was involved in something bigger than you realize. He wasn't just running from his past. He was running from the people who controlled it. Daniel's stomach churned. What did he do? Rains leaned forward, lowering his voice. He worked with them. Organized crime. Not as a foot soldier, not as muscle, but as the guy who made things disappear. Money. Records. Sometimes people. Daniel felt his world tilt on its axis. No, he muttered, shaking his head. That doesn't make sense. My father was a liar, sure, but he wasn't a criminal. He wasn't just a criminal, Rains said grimly. He was an asset, until he wasn't. The weight of it all pressed down on Daniel, but he couldn't stop now. He needed more. And this woman? He tapped the photo. Who is she? Rains hesitated, then sighed. Her name was Evelyn Monroe. She was his partner in more ways than one. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Partner? Rains nodded. They ran jobs together. Fraud, smuggling, laundering, whatever was needed. But it wasn't just business. They were close. Daniel's head spun. He had grown up believing his mother was the only woman in his father's life, the only family that mattered. But now, that belief was unraveling before his eyes. Where is she now? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. That's the problem, Rains said. She disappeared right before your father did. Some say she ran. Some say she was silenced. But one thing is clear, your father didn't just leave a name behind. He left unfinished business. Daniel swallowed hard. He had come looking for answers, but the truth was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And now, he was caught in the middle of it. Daniel sat back, his head swimming with too many questions and not enough answers. His father had been a criminal, a man who erased lives, shifted identities, and vanished into the shadows. But that wasn't the man Daniel had known. Or at least, he had thought he had known. Rains studied him carefully, his fingers drumming against the worn tabletop. I can see it's a lot to take in. Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. That's an understatement. He pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. So, my father disappeared. Reinvented himself. But why now? Why would someone start coming after me now? Rains leaned in. Because something changed. People like your father don't just go into hiding without a reason. And they sure as hell don't stay hidden forever. Someone either found something, or someone started talking. A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. He thought back to the anonymous phone call, the warning to stop digging. But if anything, it only pushed him further. What do you know about his last days? Daniel asked. Before he died. Rains hesitated. I know he was scared. I know he was trying to keep something, or someone, safe. And I know he wasn't alone. Daniel frowned. Who was with him? Rains let out a long sigh. A woman. Daniel's breath caught. Evelyn? I don't know, Rains admitted. But someone was with him when he died. Someone who vanished just as quickly. Daniel's heart pounded. His father had spent his life running, leaving behind a trail of secrets. And now, Daniel had a choice. Walk away and pretend none of it mattered, or keep chasing a past that could kill him. Rains slid a piece of paper across the table. An address. If you want to know what really happened, this is where you start. Daniel stared at the address, his fingers tightening around the edges. His father had spent his life running. Now, it was Daniel's turn to chase him down. The address burned a hole in Daniel's pocket the entire ride home. He gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing through every possibility. Who was at that address? A witness? A threat? Another ghost his father left behind? By the time he reached his apartment, exhaustion tugged at his limbs, but his mind refused to rest. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking against the glass, and sat at the small table by the window. The city lights stretched out beyond the glass, glowing like tiny embers in the night. His phone buzzed. Daniel's breath hitched. Another unknown number. With a shaking hand, he answered. Hello? Static crackled. Then a voice, low, familiar, and impossible. Daniel. His grip tightened on the phone. His pulse pounded in his ears. Who is this? A strained pause. Then, barely above a whisper, It's me. Daniel's stomach twisted into knots. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. Dad? More static. Then the line cut out. Daniel stared at the phone, his heart thundering. It wasn't possible. His father was dead. He had seen the grave. Read the obituary. Held the damn letter in his hands. But he knew that voice. He knew it. A cold shiver crept down his spine. If his father was alive, it meant one thing. Someone wanted Daniel to believe he was dead. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps as he clutched the phone, staring at the screen as if it could provide answers. His father was dead. He had to be. The grave, the obituary, the letters, everything pointed to it. But that voice, that whisper. It was him. A memory surfaced unbidden. He was 10 years old, sitting in the garage with his father, watching him repair an old radio. Static's just lost sound looking for a home. His father had said with a small smile. But if you tune in just right, you'll find the message. Static. Daniel grabbed his laptop and began searching for the call's origin. A dead-end, private number, untraceable. Whoever had called didn't want to be found. But Daniel wasn't about to let it go. He pulled out the slip of paper with the address Raines had given him and grabbed his keys. The building was a crumbling motel on the outskirts of the city, neon flickering in the damp night air. Room 214. The stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed, his pulse hammering in his ears. He knocked twice. Silence. Then footsteps. The door cracked open just enough for Daniel to see a sliver of a face, familiar yet different. The lines around the mouth deeper. The hair grayer. Daniel's stomach clenched. Jesus, the man muttered. You really don't know when to stop, do you? Daniel swallowed hard. You. The man sighed, opening the door wider. Come inside before you get both of us killed. Daniel hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he stepped inside anyway. The door shut behind him with a quiet click. And Daniel came face to face with a past he thought had died long ago. Daniel's heart pounded as the door clicked shut behind him. The dim motel room smelled of cigarette smoke and old fabric, the flickering lamp casting long shadows against peeling wallpaper. The man standing before him was both a stranger and someone he felt he had known forever. You look just like him, the man muttered, rubbing his temples. It's eerie. Daniel stiffened. Like who? The man exhaled. Your father. Or whatever you think he was. Daniel clenched his fists. He was my father. The man studied him, then gestured to a chair. Sit down. You're not going to like what I have to say. Daniel hesitated but finally sat, never taking his eyes off the man. Who are you? A tired smile. Call me Garrett. I used to know your father. The real one. Daniel's stomach tightened. The real one? Garrett nodded. Richard Carter, Michael Harrison, Peter Caldwell, whatever name he was using at the time, wasn't just running from something. He was something. A fabrication. A man created out of necessity. But there was a time before that, before he became someone else. Daniel's mind raced. What are you saying? I'm saying. Garrett leaned forward, his voice low. That your father didn't just change his name. He erased who he was. And you were never supposed to find out. Daniel felt his pulse hammer against his skull. Why? Garrett sighed, rubbing his face. Because the people who helped him disappear? They don't leave loose ends. And right now you're a loose end, Daniel. The weight of the words pressed down on him. So, what was he hiding from? Garrett leaned back, watching him carefully. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Daniel swallowed hard. He had come here for answers, but all he had were more questions. And now, he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the truth at all. Daniel stared at Garrett, the weight of his words pressing down on him like a stone. His father wasn't just running, he had erased himself. But why? And from whom? I need more than riddles, Daniel said, his voice tight. If I'm in danger, I need to know why. Garrett rubbed his temple, exhaling heavily. Your father had two lives. The one you knew, and the one he abandoned. He wasn't just running from criminals, Daniel. He was running from his other family. Daniel's blood ran cold. Other family? Garrett nodded, watching him closely. Your father was married before. Had a son before you. And something went wrong. Very wrong. Daniel felt like the floor beneath him had vanished. That's impossible. My mother would have. She didn't know, Garrett interrupted. Not fully. She knew your father had a past, but not the extent of it. Not what happened? Daniel clenched his jaw. Then tell me. Garrett hesitated before continuing. Your father's first wife, her name was Lillian Monroe. She and your father had a son together, Ethan. But then, Lillian turned up dead, and Ethan disappeared. Your father went into hiding after that, cutting ties with everyone. Daniel's mind reeled. Are you saying he killed her? Garrett shook his head. I don't know. But the people who were after him thought so. And they never stopped looking. A knot twisted in Daniel's gut. And Ethan? Garrett exhaled. That's what you need to find out. The room felt suffocating. Daniel had spent his entire life thinking he was uncovering the truth about his father. Now, it turned out he had only been scratching the surface. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A single text message. Stop digging. Daniel's grip tightened around the device. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. And now, Daniel had a half-brother he had never met, a dead woman he had never known, and a father who had lived more lies than he could count. He took a deep breath and looked at Garrett. Tell me where to start. Garrett studied Daniel for a long moment before pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. He slid it across the table, his fingers lingering on the edges. This is where you start, he said. Daniel hesitated before picking it up. An address. Another one. What's here? He asked, his voice low. Garrett exhaled. A man named Victor Monroe. Lillian's brother. He's the last person who saw Ethan before he disappeared. Daniel's stomach twisted. His supposed half-brother had been a ghost all his life, a shadow lurking behind the walls of his father's past. Now, he had a name and a lead, one that might finally give him the answers he sought. He shoved the address into his pocket and stood. I need to go. Garrett's expression darkened. Be careful, Daniel. Victor isn't just some concerned uncle. He's dangerous. If he thinks you're here to stir up the past, he won't hesitate to make you disappear, too. Daniel clenched his jaw. Then I won't give him the chance. The house was old, worn by time, with ivy creeping up its brick walls like nature itself was trying to consume it. Daniel knocked twice. The door creaked open almost immediately, revealing a man in his late 50s, his eyes sharp and calculating. You're Richard's boy, Victor said, not as a question, but a statement. Daniel nodded, his pulse thrumming. I need to talk about Ethan. Victor let out a dry chuckle. Of course you do. He stepped aside, gesturing for Daniel to enter. Come on in, then. Let's see how much of the truth you can handle. Daniel stepped inside, knowing there was no turning back now. The final piece of his father's puzzle was waiting to be uncovered, and for better or worse, he was about to see the full picture. The sun was setting by the time Daniel arrived at the cemetery. the golden light stretching long shadows across the rows of headstones. He had spent the past 2 days unraveling the final pieces of his father's story, and now he was back where it had all started, standing in front of a grave that bore a name that still felt like a lie. Michael Harrison. He knelt down, brushing away a few fallen leaves that had gathered at the base of the stone. The past few days had felt like stepping into a life that wasn't his own, and yet it had been carved into his bones before he had even been born. He had found Ethan, his half-brother. A man who had been forced into the shadows just as their father had. But Ethan hadn't wanted to be found, he had made that clear. The scars on his face, the weight in his voice, he had lived his entire life as a ghost, and Daniel's questions had only risked dragging him further into the light. "I met him," Daniel murmured, his voice hoarse. "He's alive. He doesn't want anything to do with me." The wind whispered through the trees, offering no answer, no solace. He had uncovered the truth. His father had spent his life running, trying to protect both families, trying to erase a past that refused to be forgotten. And in the end, it had killed him. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You should have told me." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, weathered photograph, the one Garrett had given him. It was his father, younger, smiling, standing next to Lillian. A life before Daniel. A life he had never been meant to know about. He placed the photograph against the headstone and stood. The weight of the past still clung to him, but for the first time, it felt bearable. "I won't run," he whispered. "Not like you did." With one final glance at the grave, Daniel turned and walked away. The truth had been uncovered, the ghost laid to rest. And though the past would always be with him, he was ready to face whatever came next. The night was cool as Daniel stepped into his apartment, the silence settling around him like an old, familiar coat. He had spent the past days digging up ghosts, uncovering the truth of a man he had barely known. But there was one last piece of the puzzle waiting for him. He placed his keys on the counter and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. The old paper was yellowed at the edges, his name scrawled across the front in a handwriting he hadn't seen in years. His father's handwriting. His fingers trembled as he tore it open, carefully unfolding the letter inside. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and there are things I never had the courage to tell you. You probably hate me, and I won't ask for your forgiveness. But I need you to understand. Everything I did to keep you safe. There were people, dangerous people, who wanted me dead. And if they knew about you, they would have come for you too. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because it was the only way I could protect you. I never stopped watching, Daniel. I knew about your graduation. Your first job. The house you bought. I was there, even when you didn't know it. I wanted to reach out, but I knew I couldn't. Not without putting you at risk. I know you found Ethan. I hoped you never would. He carries the weight of my mistakes, just like you do. And now you have a choice. You can bury this, walk away, and live your life free of my sins. Or you can keep searching. But if you do, understand this, some truths are best left in the past. I love you, son. And I am sorry. Dad. Daniel read the letter 3 times before he finally let himself breathe. His father had been a liar, a runaway, a man haunted by his own choices. But he had also been a father who, in his own broken way, had never stopped caring. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with the others. His father had left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: he wouldn't run from the truth. Not anymore. As he looked out into the night, he knew his journey wasn't over. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid to keep going. Daniel stood by the open window, the city's distant hum filling the quiet of his apartment. The letter sat on the table behind him, the words still pressing against his chest, but the weight of them had shifted. He had spent so long chasing answers, trying to find the man behind the name, the truth behind the grave. Now, he had them. And yet, the final decision remained. Would he keep searching? Or would he let it end here? His father had lived his life in fragments, torn between past and present, running from ghosts he could never escape. Daniel had walked in those footsteps, peeling away layers of lies and secrets, only to arrive at the same crossroads his father had faced. He turned back to the table and picked up the envelope, running his fingers over the edges one last time before sliding it into the small wooden box that now housed every piece of the man his father had been. The past was here, in his hands, but it no longer had to define him. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He hesitated before crossing the room, his pulse steady as he turned the knob. Ethan stood in the dim hallway, his expression unreadable. "You called?" he said simply. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. I figured if we were both carrying this, we didn't have to do it alone." Ethan studied him for a moment, then exhaled, stepping inside. "So, where do we start?" Daniel glanced at the box on the table, then back at his brother. "By deciding what stays buried." The past had shaped them, but it would not define them. Not anymore. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt free.